The 2025-26 Premier League campaign kicks off today, and we are expecting to see more tactical tweaks, exciting details, and bizarre strategies than ever. So in today's video, I'll be explaining why we are bound to see plenty more of this to deal with man-to-man pressing schemes, how to unlock those stubborn low blocks, and why a lot of the recruitment this summer has followed a similar pattern. Out of possession approaches drive in possession solutions. This feels like the perfect way to describe what we're going to be talking about in today's video, which is the 2025-2026 tactical landscape of the Premier League. Starting off with the man-to-man press, because it is becoming a staple in the Premier League. And as you can see on screen, I've got your stereotypical man-to-man press in a four-back, where you've got one of the midfielders sort of covering one of the pocket players. You want two sort of central presences to usually move on to those sort of double pivots of the other team. So again, most teams, we're talking about this sort of setup where you have three along the back, two in the midfield, usually creating a box, and then you've got sort of your two wide presences and a striker. Now, this can be formed in many different ways, but this is sort of how you would see that pressing scheme sort of play out. And the key sort of things that I think managers are going to start trying to utilize this season in order to win this battle against these man-to-man pressing teams is firstly those sort of carriers and the ability to beat your man 1v1. Because if you're getting followed all around the pitch by one man, what you always have the chance to do is beat them and create an overload. Now, that starts from the back, because I think fullbacks, especially now, you're bringing in fullbacks who can carry the ball. Because when you get trapped in these wide areas in this man-to-man press, and if we just get rid of all of these arrows just so you can speak about it, if you get sort of caught into these areas, if you're able to then create and beat the man off that, then all of a sudden, somebody has to account for this. Now, if that's the man that is sort of stepping onto Fernandez, especially on this side, that might mean that this guy has to come over, which leaves sort of Cucurella free in the middle. People have to start shuffling. And as people start shuffling in a man-to-man press, there's always going to be that spare man that you can find. So carrying, in my opinion, is probably one of the biggest sort of factors to this nowadays. Now, and this can be, like I say, this can be from the back, but also this can be with these sort of number 8 players in these pockets who have the ability to drift into these areas that we've spoke about before, someone like Cole Palmer. And if he can drag this man out with him, Neto is already pinning this guy here. And of course, there's another guy behind him. But if he can beat this man and get into that space there, gets past him, all of a sudden, again, picture opens up. Because all of a sudden, this guy maybe has to jump onto him, or this guy has to jump over. Somebody has to account for him. Otherwise, he can just make up ground towards the goal too easily, and Chelsea have an overload. So carriers is one of the biggest things. And I think in terms of what Chelsea have done, I think you've got someone like Jarell Hato who can carry the ball forward from defence. You've already got quite a few players that can do that in terms of Joshua Chempong, players as such. You've now brought in, you're looking to bring in Xavi Simons who can bring that. You've got wingers, of course, who can do that. And I do think the additions, obviously Esteban as well, I do think that this is leaning towards making sure that Chelsea have that ability to do that as well. Because like I say, I think it is a very important aspect of the game when it comes to beating that man-to-man press. Another aspect of beating that man-to-man press is, of course, those zone replacement and zone rotations that we spoke about. Because, again, if we're talking about, especially in one of the pockets, when you've got a midfielder here, usually the man-to-man press will be triggered by which way this midfielder goes. When it comes to having these players rotate, what it can account for, again, is if Cucurella pushes up into here and Fernandez rotates into here, this man is the one who's undecided now, because he either follows Cucurella, allowing Fernandez to get on the ball and basically bringing you this sort of overload here because you've got a 5v4, or this player has, for some reason, like, again, some teams that really aggressively press man for man, the centre-back could have followed Fernandez all the way to make sure they don't end up with an overload here. But then what you've got is Cucurella running away into that space with somebody who's not actually a defender. You've got somebody who's more of a sort of attacking central midfielder. It depends who's in that position for the opposition team. So these sort of rotations cause not only mismatches in terms of sort of creating gaps between that back line, but also that moment of indecision, because all it takes is that sort of split second for this player not to know whether to go with Cucurella or stay with Fernandez. And that's the extra split second of creating separation for someone like Cucurella or Fernandez that can help. And this is in any position. Again, we spoke about it the other day with Palmer and Esteban in wide areas. again, does this player stay or does he go? If he goes inside, he leaves an open sort of winger. If he stays with, then sort of this player can get the ball in the half space. And it's those sort of rotations that can really sort of affect man-to-man pressing schemes and make teams, if anything, want to go zonal for that aspect so that they are not getting beaten with those zone replacement ideas. The last thing I wanted to touch on when it comes to beating a man-to-man press is the split strikers, which I think is going to be key this season. Now, if I just really quickly set this up, how it could look, because what I think when it comes to sort of the split strikers is you're looking more at doing this from sort of deep goal kick scenarios. Now, I'll quickly flash an example up in a minute, but one way that sort of Chelsea looked to do this at times, and it wasn't with a split striker, it was more so with Cole Palmer and creating a bit of a distance between those players. But if teams are pressing in, say, a 4-4-2, and they're pressing up, let's say, man for man in this aspect. So you've got two players here, two players here, two players here. So that you got your like attacking midfielder and your striker here. You got your wingers out wide, sort of on the fullbacks. You've got your midfielders on the double pivot. And then you've got a defender, like I say, pushed up maybe with Cole Palmer, sort of dragged away here. You've got the wingers sort of pinning these players out wide. And what it can lead to is this being a 1v1 area in the middle of the pitch for a long ball. Now, of course, with Cole Palmer, what he's done here, and in the game that sort of we used as example, he's dragged this player away because he knows that João Pedro, he's not the most physical Cole Palmer. So if he drags him away, he's going to give João Pedro more room to sort of operate, win that ball, bring it down, take his time, and then try and spin off into one of the channels. Again, if this is Delap, same thing. Delap has that sort of brute force. I think they have different ways of doing it, João Pedro and Delap. Delap a little bit more brute force, Pedro a little bit more sort of IQ movement and sort of technical quality when he comes to sort of protecting the ball when he brings it down in terms of that target man play. But also, again, we saw in the World Cup, the Club World Cup, what we could eventually see is with both of these players, with Pedro playing off, and I'm not saying that Palmer wouldn't play, but just for sort of the sake of it in this video, what you could then see is creating these 2v2 moments for these two players. Oh, let me use this. And that's another way of using those split strikers to have these 2v2 breaks by dragging all these players sort of in and away. And again, you can have these wingers really deep to drag those fullbacks away from play, or you can have them really wide to drag those fullbacks further away from helping. And again, you've got that big sort of gap where the two strikers can affect the game. And that's why I think split strikers are going to become really sort of useful this season for teams that just want to bypass man-to-man pressure straight from goal kicks over into that area. So that is the three ways that I think man-to-man pressing schemes are going to be dealt with this season. Now we're on to the mid-block, and we're talking about a unit that is, the purpose of a mid-block is to be condensed, to be compact, and to sort of stunt that central progression. And this is something that, again, is becoming very sort of unanimous in the Premier League, I would say. It's because it's working to stunt teams and to stunt their sort of progression into these overloaded midfield areas that we keep seeing teams try to use. And I do think it's another reason why we're seeing the return of sort of direct play and players that can sort of give you that avenue to play direct. Because one of the best ways to beat a mid-block is, again, where is the space? Football is a game about sort of finding space, taking space. Can you create that space to create goals from? Now, in this game, and against a mid-block, of course, the space is not in the middle of the pitch. So the two areas that you've got most space is in those wide areas when you shift it from side to side, but also in behind in terms of the space behind the mid-block, because it is a mid-block, not a low block. So the first sort of avenue is to be able to play those direct balls into the channels and turn defenders around so that they can't sit in this stable mid-block. If you start horseshoeing the ball around the middle of the pitch and sort of just trying to find a way to progress the ball, trying to find ways to intricately get the ball into there, that the mid-block's got you where it wants because it's compact and it's doing its job. If you start turning the defenders around, having certain players having to drop off, and then these players have to sort of cover larger distances, all of a sudden the mid-block can't be as compact anymore and those distances cannot be contained within them. So that is one of the key aspects in terms of being able to go direct. And in that sense, again, we talk about players that Chelsea have brought in. Gitten's a player who can attack that last line. Garnacho is somebody who's on the sort of periphery of, like, looks like he's going to be coming in. João Pedro, and especially Liam Delap, somebody who can run in behind and be a real threat against those mid-blocks with those balls over the top. And of course, you've got players like Enzo Fernandez, like you had Levi Cole in the back line, like Reece James, like Casado when he drops into these areas, who can pick those passes into that area. And even Robert Sanchez on his day, not to say that he does it consistently, but on his day, he can pick those long passes over a mid-block. So it's something to look at. Now, of course, you won't really get the chance with the goalkeeper over the mid-block. But the point is, if you recycle the ball, there's different ways of sort of going over the top of the press, especially when it comes to that mid-block. The other thing to speak about is overload to isolate positions on the wide areas, because as I said, those wide areas are important because, again, you're trying to sort of stunt that central access to the point where those wide areas can become apparent. Now, if you can control the ball in one of these wide areas, what I would say is a pattern that's going to emerge even more, and it's something that's already been emerging last season. I've had a few tweets about it, is playing off of getting the ball to your winger. Now, when the winger drops deep to receive the ball against, say, a mid-block, as soon as that ball is at their feet, what it's going to cause is a shift. And as that sort of, let me just come off this, as that shift happens, the winger can sort of keep a hold of the ball initially. I'm not sure why it's done that, but let's just leave it like that. He can shift the ball, that he can make the block shift over towards him. And then within 2 passes, or even 1 pass, quick switches of play can be really effective, because if you can get that ball over to here, you've got this player who's isolated because of how these players are trying to stay compact. They want their distances to be close together. So this player's not going to stay all the way out here. Otherwise, look at the gap. Again, this back four doesn't want to be stretched out like this. So it's going to shuffle over and sort of bank on the fact that they can get over when the ball does get switched. But this is something, and it's another way of getting that ball over to the other side of the pitch, being direct and getting those 1v1 isolations with your opposite winger. And again, if you saw my video the other day, I think this is something Maresca is trying to utilise when it comes to that right side of the pitch versus the left side of the pitch. So I do think this is another way that Chelsea and all other teams are going to look to continue to utilise their sort of overload to isolate principles against mid-block teams. Now, when it comes to a low block, let's speak about how you can sort of beat them, because I think it's a question that so many people ask, because it's something that, again, in the Premier League, we see so much today. And this can be low in this pact. They can drop off even further into their own box. There's so many different ways, just realized I highlighted all them players, that a low block can be deployed. But, and of course, this can be a back 5, a back 4, there's lots of different ways. But the best ways to beat a low block are often the simple ways. And a lot of people sort of ask that question. For me, one of the key, set pieces straight away, because it is a game state changer. If you can win set pieces and you can score that goal to open them up, if you can change a game state from a drawing game state to a winning game state, a lot of you know this, I speak about this a lot, then all of a sudden they cannot sit in this shape happily anymore, because they have to take some initiative to get back in the game. So that is key. Can you sort of, through those minimal gains, such as set pieces, can you maximize that to give your team a better chance of being in those positive game states that they need to be in? But secondly, and again, I said this a lot last season, volume actions versus high percentage regains. That is the 2 things that you want to be focusing on when it comes to low blocks. High volume actions. This can mean crosses into the area. And again, this is something that's key, because now Chelsea have players like Pedro and Delap who can be a bit more of a threat inside the box. But if we just move these players up, do it like this. Something that you want to do against these low block teams is you want to squeeze them in, because again, and Trent spoke about this, and we know this is something that is so key against these sort of teams. Once you can set your nets, and if you move up the pitch as a whole unit, okay, not just sort of separate. If you go too quickly and the lines get too far apart, then it's hard to sort of set those counter-pressing nets. But if you move up the team as one and you can set that counter-pressing net, then it is okay to then put the ball at risk. Because if you then start trying to zip the ball into these areas or put crosses into the box, or even get shots off, again, like causing those moments of chaos, then what will happen is as soon as they win the ball back, they're sort of, or they block it or something like this, their instant is to get rid. And it's those moments where they try to get rid, or if they try to counter-attack, which is key, that this shape can spread. And once they try to hit you, if you can win the ball back as they're in that moment where they think that they can hit you on the break and they start to move out of that low block shape, but you win the ball back because you've got these three players all ready to pounce. You've got sort of this, you've got both your pivot players in really good positions. Usually it would be sort of more of a 2-3 in this situation. You'd have it sort of a bit like this. So you'd have all of these players ready to jump and win that ball back. And if you can win the ball back within that, when there's sort of stretched positions, like I say, it could be in lots of different ways, then that's your moment to go. So the only way that's going to happen is if you can get into their half, sustain pressure, and then use those high volume actions to create those moments of chaos. And like I say, that comes from shooting, that comes from really a lot of different things. So like crosses. So for me, against low blocks, it is really that simple of can you sustain pressure? Can you create lots of chances to create those chaos moments and put yourself in positions where you're going to be able to win the ball back effectively? Because that is extremely key against these low block sides. And I think they're the two main ones when it comes to beating a low block. And again, it may sound simple, but football is a simple game. And that is how you sort of break down those mid to low blocks. And lastly, just to touch on the pressing side of things, because I do think Chelsea will continue to sort of press from this 4-1-4-1 sort of base setup because of the sort of flexibility that it gives you and the different shapes that it can become, but also the personnel that Chelsea have between it. I think against these sort of 3-2-5, 3-2-4-1 teams, it gives you a good sort of opportunity to have double pressure on those double pivot players from Fernandes and Palmer or whoever's in those pockets. You have wingers who can apply pressure to the wide centre-back, but can also sort of drop in to help and sort of stunt that progression into not only the pocket players, but also in here. You've got Caicedo and then the centre-backs who can be extremely aggressive. So depending on the game, Caicedo can sort of jump over to one side more commonly, usually the side that Fernandes isn't on. So let's say he's jumping over on this side, and then you would have that, say, this defender being quite aggressive to jump out and press and sort of apply pressure here, and then toast in here. But of course, Chelsea want to sometimes, when they can, keep that +1 in the back line as well, and you got those fullbacks. So it gives you that sort of opportunity to do that man for man, and it's something we saw a lot last season. But what it also gives you the chance to do is, let's say that the team sort of is in a 4 at the back. Let's say they're setting up against this. What I think it sort of gives you that chance to do is still apply pressure. Let's say there's 2 in here and they're playing a bit more of a sort of stereotypical 4-2-3-1. Now, Caicedo can sort of be almost the hybrid player in this aspect, because you've got Fernandes and Palmer playing on these men here. And then what you would have, let's just say that they're a little bit deeper in this scenario, is you've got pressure here, Pedro sort of waiting to sort of see which way the sort of team shifts. When that happens, one of these players can jump up, usually Palmer, to be in that front 2, which means Caicedo can then sort of be in that hybrid role where he can jump onto here. One of the centre-backs would then, obviously, if they're a lot higher, would have to jump onto here. And again, it would be that sort of similar thing where teams and Chelsea are ready to jump and sort of make those decisions on the fly, depending on what side the team goes. I think the other thing to take into account is that Chelsea, again, have at times dropped into a back 5 off the ball. We've seen it with Neto, we've seen it with Gittins. Again, it depends on the personnel, depends who's playing, who they're against. But I think it also just gives you from that 4-1-4-1, because they can be a little bit higher, to then eventually drop in when you're playing in a block, get into that 5 back, and it can be a little bit lopsided because let's say Palmer's sort of ready to sort of press over here. Pedro in here. Gittins is a little bit higher because let's say if this winger drops in and this one's usually a bit higher, it's usually one side's a bit higher than the other. And it would look something like this, a little bit lopsided in terms of how they're pressing. But again, it gives you that sort of back 5 off the ball when you're looking to sit a little bit deeper in a block of 5. So I think those are the different ways that Chelsea could adapt in terms of how they're going to use their press this year. And I think that's why a lot of it will be done from that 4-1-4-1 base shape, which will often become that 4-4-2 with Palmer in the front line with Pedro and Caicedo alongside Fernandes. So I think that there's a lot of sort of flexibility that it gives you. And I think that's something, again, to watch out for this season. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Please do let me know any questions you have on any of the topics, and I'll try to get to them in the comments. Please do like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.